name is Bob, and I grew up in Mississippi. Tupelo is home. I live in California. I have a number of roles. My wife and I are on staff with CRU, Campus Crusade for Christ. There is a small division of CRU called the Medical Strategic Network, which was founded by a gastroenterologist, a Chinese guy born in the Philippines, did med school in the Philippines, and then came to the U.S. and residency in Southern California in medicine, GI fellowship at Mayo Clinic, and then went back to California and started thinking about healthcare think about how, and students think about how they could integrate their faith into their patient care. I also have a adjunct faculty appointment at Loma Linda University School of Medicine and do a lot of work with their family medicine residency program. I am not a physician. I am not a nurse. I'm not a PA. I'm not an MA. And I have no qualifications at all to be here. So you can leave now. But I have been working in the healthcare world for about 25 years now in this area of spiritual care. And it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing with the least of these and underserved. You know it's hard. Talked about that in the last hour. And I see that. I've been for the last year and a half. Steve Noblet connected FQHC CEO and I together out in LA. And I've been working with them, training their staff and their faculty for the past year. So I get a little taste of the world that you work in. So thank you. When it comes to spiritual care, one of the things that I started seeing was some of the challenges. This was about 2.5 years ago. Some of the increasing challenges that you're facing in your work, and that is increasing limited time that you have with your patients. I understand some of the reasons that happens. Some of those are realities. Some of those are maybe come from a good place. But I personally feel like that's a train wreck and really unfortunate for you. And really unfortunate for your patients as well. But here we are. And as I began to see that and hear that more and more from people that I've worked with, I got on the phone or I started texting some people who have attended we do a summer 4-week preceptorship in Southern California. This will be the 24th year that we've done this deep dive training healthcare students how to integrate their faith into their patient care. And I started calling some of them and just saying, I assume you're doing some whole person care, spiritual care with your patients. And oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, okay, so how are you managing that with all the other medical, dental things that you have to keep up with? How are you managing that with the ever decreasing amount of time that you have? And I heard a lot of groans when I said that. But then they started sharing and they started, well, I do this or I do that, or I think this, or I pray that. And in those 5 or 6 conversations, some were on the phone, some were Zoom, some were face-to-face, I began to collect what I thought that's a really good idea. And that's a lot of wisdom. And that goes back to why are you here in the first place as individuals? And so this is going to be presentation-wise, a horrible presentation, not a lot of creativity. I'm going to try to mix in a little bit of discussion for you guys with each other. But I might be accused, just like some of those dreadful professors you had and you have now, where all you do is go to class and they read the slides to you. Well, get ready to do some reading, okay? But it won't be all reading. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. Also, where I'm coming from is when I talk about whole person care, spiritual care, obviously I am coming from a Christian perspective. It's a fairly simple mindset and approach. It comes from a position, and I talked about this yesterday, it comes from a position of seeing if there is a spiritual need that your patients have. And if there is a need, does that patient recognize that spiritual need? Do they want to have that addressed? And do they give consent, permission to have that addressed? Now, you might, or some I don't think you would ask this, but some of your colleagues, especially outside of CCHF circles, might look at you and say, well, why in the world would you do that? Well, the shorthand is there is a significant amount of peer-reviewed literature that you're probably aware of that shows that when the whole person is taken care of, medical, emotional, spiritual, outcomes are better. Patient satisfaction goes through the roof in a positive way. In some cases, the cost of healthcare goes down. And the other thing is the Joint Commission historically has required that type of thing be done. And the other thing is I have seen time and time again that doing this type of care can be incredibly life-giving to you as a Christian healthcare professional. So that's where I'm coming from when I talk about spiritual care. I'd like to introduce Alicia Kadane to you. I met Alicia the summer before she started med school at Harvard. Alicia was attending our summer whole person care preceptorship and did her residency in family medicine and has been practicing down in Houston for a number of years. She has worked as an attending at Baylor, and then she's done some nonprofit stuff. And I think right now, Alicia is in private practice. But when I got Alicia on the phone, and we've been in touch with Alicia a lot over the years, I think she came to our very first preceptorship in 2001. And Alicia told me, she said, my first visit with every patient, she said, I do a quick spiritual history. She said, I have 15 minutes appointments with established patients. I have 30-minute appointments with new or annual patients. And she told me, she said, Bob, I can do that in about 60 to 90 seconds. And some of these questions are typical spiritual history questions and will be reviewed for many of you. But she will ask things like, tell me about your support system. Do you have a good support system? Tell me about the work that you're doing. If they're a student, tell me about where you're in school. If they are retired, she will find out what they did in the past and what they are doing currently in terms of job, volunteering, activities. And then she says, I will ask them about their goals, just in general. It could be health goals, it could be personal goals, family goals, whatever. And she told me, she said, when I start asking about that, things begin to open up about what's going on with them. And a lot of times that not only gives me an idea if there's a spiritual need there, but a lot of times what's going on in their life and what they're dealing with could have a direct bearing on their reason that they're in her office. She will ask them about their coping system. She may or may not say, so what's your coping system? She might say something like, what keeps you going when times are hard? And if they do not mention that one of the components of their coping system is faith or God, she will specifically ask them if they have any type of spiritual beliefs, faith. Is faith meaningful to you? And then she'll ask about what that looks like. In my work, a lot of times when people are taking a spiritual history, when they ask the coping question, what keeps you going? What's your source of strength? There is an assumption there that if a person is involved in a faith community or God is important to them, they will mention that. And a lot of times clinicians will think, well, if they didn't mention God, they must not be into that, and I sure better not ask about that because they might get offended or they might not be happy with that. And what I have found is it is completely okay and acceptable to specifically ask somebody, are you part of a faith community? Or is God or religion important to you? And what I have found is this fear that they didn't mention that, so I better not mention that. I have found that to be unfounded. How's that for good English? Glad my high school English teacher isn't here. What I have seen is if they are not into religion, they're not into God, they're not into Christianity, they will just very nonchalantly tell me, oh, I'm not into that, or I don't believe any of that. Or they will even say, I'm an atheist, and they're not upset about it. So don't make that mistake. Alicia says with every patient during this 60 to second, and I can't remember if she does this at the end of her spiritual history or the end of her visit. She will always offer prayer. In the way that she does it, she will just say, would it be helpful if I pray for you before you leave? And then if a patient says yes, she will maybe follow that up. Well, anything specific that you would like to pray for? And in terms of praying with the patient, I think brevity is good. And when I say brevity, I'm talking 15 to 30, 40 seconds. And you can pray for things that they mentioned in the appointment. If you ask them anything in particular, you can pray for that. Again, I think just a simple prayer. Some of my go-to phrases that I will use, that they will know that God is aware of what's going on. God, I pray that Mr. Rodriguez would know your comfort, your presence, your peace. I pray for, I'm not a clinician, but if I were, pray for myself and my team as we take care of him, that you'd help us to have insight and understanding, help us to take good care of him. And he mentioned being concerned about who's going to feed his pets if he ends up in the hospital. So I pray you'd work that out. Pray all this in your son's name. Amen. So that's what Alicia told me. Let me see. Alicia also, family medicine, sees kids, and she'll do a little modified kids spiritual history with her peds patients. Now, I don't think she does this with her 2-year-olds. Probably, I'm thinking maybe she starts doing this when they're 6, 7, 8, certainly into middle school and junior high. Tell me about your living situation. What grade are you in? Any clubs, sports, extracurricular activities she'll ask about. Tell me about your friends. And what do you want to be when you grow up? And she will ask them about faith as well. She'll probably just say something like, so do you attend church? And I don't know, if I were doing this and they said no, I might say, hi, have you ever wanted to attend church? And then she offers to pray with them as well. That's those, I think, including this in these spiritual history questions, especially with your first visit with a patient. And if you say, I don't have time to ask 5 questions, okay, well, ask 1 or 2. And maybe begin to ask 1 or 2 questions per visit. Doesn't take a long time, but it will begin to get you into the zone. And then the other thing, that when you start asking these types of questions, it will communicate to your patients that you are somebody who cares a lot more than their labs and their meds and their next appointment. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of patients think. And that's the impression that they get. And so for you to sort of buck that tide and show that you care about them can make a huge difference. When it comes to taking a spiritual history and spiritual history questions, you all have been trained so well, and you have so much information, and you know the 50 questions to ask about hypertension, or the 25 questions to ask about whatever, but you probably don't ask all 50 questions when you go in to see a patient. Am I right? But what I bet you do is, as you're reading the chart and you see what their chief complaint is and maybe what their history is and things you want to find out about, you start thinking about the 1 or 2 questions you're going to ask. The med students that I worked with a couple of years ago were really into this thing that they called high yield. And anything they did, they wanted it to be high yield. So I only go to high yield lectures. I only do high yield review. And so what I would suggest, especially if you're limited on time and you want to ask some spiritual history questions, look at the chart before you go in, begin to think, and try to think of 1 or 2 potential high yield spiritual history questions. And probably one of the most common one, you look at your chart, man, they are sick or they are miserable. They might be going to be well in a few days, and you know that. They may or may not know that. And maybe one of the high yield questions is, as you're going through and getting the history of present illness, and they're dumping on you all the things that are going on, it's like, wow, that is a lot. What keeps you going during all that time? That's a spiritual history question. High yield, and it fits right in. This is Ben. I met Ben when after his first year in med school, he was at the University of Indiana. Ben is actually now working medical missions inside the 1040 window and just showed up there this year. But these are some of the things that Ben told me. He said, every day when I'm going to work, when I get to clinic, I invite God into my day and I seek to follow his lead. I let the Holy Spirit convict me, lead me. In the mornings, now get this, he said, in the mornings when I pray that prayer, it seems that God opens more doors. Wow. It's like that thing, I don't know about coincidences, but what I do know is that when I pray, coincidences happen. God opens more doors. He says, and this is where a lot of you have an advantage working at a faith-based or volunteering at a faith-based institution or clinic or system. Ben told me, and he was at a faith-based FQHC at the time when we talked. And he said, it's a lot easier with a team. And he said, my team and I pray together, and that helps. He said, it is important to remember if a patient tells me something or there's a spiritual need, or I refer them to a verse or something like that. If I don't remember that, then that can be disappointing or even damaging to a patient. So he said, I will chart things about the spiritual care and about things that they mention. He said he has an MA who is passionate about doing a whole person care, and his MA would actually take the spiritual history and make suggestions to him based on what the MA had found during the history. So this isn't limited to physicians or PAs or nurse pracs. Everybody can get in on this. Ben said what we were talking about earlier, just try to at least ask one or two questions. Says it's hard not to keep the conversation going from one visit to another. You know, last time you were here, you mentioned this, and we prayed about this. So tell me, how are things going with that? He said a lot of patients, once he prays with them or once he begins to ask these types of questions, they begin to expect and hope for. I think we've heard several people say, well, you know, doctors walking out the door and they prayed with them before, and the patients are like, wait, aren't you going to pray? That does happen. When he charts, he'll maybe make a note about where he wants to go next visit with them. Now, Ben was real. He was honest. He said, certain days I get behind and I just can't do it. He said, other times I can't help with other questions. And he said, other times I just sort of triage, put a Band-Aid on it, spiritually speaking. But I really appreciated Ben. He said, if it's urgent on a spiritual level, he said, I deal with it. And I suspect, patient shows up, they weren't scheduled for a long visit, and all of a sudden they tell you something that's pretty significant. A lot of times you just deal with it and you get behind. Bruce Sabbath. Met Bruce before he started med school at Johns Hopkins, came to our summer preceptorship. Bruce is now a pulmonologist at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. And we had a long talk, and he said, I just realized, and I want to have the same attitude as Jesus. Jesus got up early and he stayed late. He said, a lot of times I just don't feel like it. And when I don't feel like it, I pray. And pray things like, oh, God, don't let me hurt the patient. Guide me. Help me with my patients. And he says, when I pray that, God seems to send me patients that are open, that are willing, that have a need, and that I can step into. And his spiritual history questions are things like ask if they're a part of a faith or currently or church, do they have a religious background? He said, if they're not open to that, I'm always looking for opportunity. I'm looking for needs, and I'm looking for ways that I can step into that. He said, another honest guy. He said, I do what I can. And he told me a story, and I realized this is Bruce, and you may or may not be able to do this type of thing in your setting. But in terms of this attitude of wanting to serve his patients and take care of them, he said, I had a patient in my clinic. They needed to do a procedure. It was like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They were there. I called the lab or whatever, and hey, can I send this patient over? Just be real quick, do this thing. And he said they didn't want to do it. And he said the reason they didn't want to do it was because they didn't want to take time and not be able to be out the door right at 5 o'clock. And so the patient was going to have to come back. And I thought that was ridiculous. And so I went over to the lab. I got the cart, whatever. I brought it over and I did it myself. Everybody can't do that. You might not be able to do that. But I really appreciated Ben taking the time, even with the time constraints, to step in. I said, Ben, Bruce, to do that. A lot of times, you're just sprinting through your day and you can't keep up and you're getting behind and the cases are more complex. And I know you guys deal with a lot of stuff that's incredible. Patients that are just so complex, so many things going on because of their economic situation, or they didn't come in, or they don't take care of themselves. And you're just going. And on a day like that, you don't like to hear the question, well, what would Jesus do? And you don't really like to think a lot about stepping in, and especially this going, and getting behind. This is John Shin. I met John during his first year of medical school in Southern California. John finished med school. He did a internal medicine residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. He stuck around there and did HEMONC at Mayo. Then he went and did a stint at NIH in Bethesda, and then he came back to Southern California. John and his colleague, another friend of mine, Joel Brothers, they talk about when it comes to whole person care and spiritual care, they say that oncology is where the low-lying fruit is, low-hanging fruit. But I had lunch with John, and we're talking about the time and all this. And so how you do it? How do you manage it? Now, to be fair, John is in an academic institution, academic center. And so he said it's not like private practice. And so with new patients, I get an hour. And he said with returning patients, I get 30 minutes. It's a luxury you don't have, or many of you don't have. What John told me is something I think you might be able to use if you're so inclined. And I said, so John, but he's like still busy. And a lot of times he has med students with him or residents or fellows. And guess what? Ignore this, students, but you guys know they slow you down, like dragging like 300 pounds. That's when you got 4 of them. So you're thinking 30 minutes. Well, yeah, there's some qualifiers to it. John told me, he said, I pre-round on my patients. He said, before I go in the room, I am current on their labs. I am current on their past history. He told me before I go in the room, I have made all of my medical decisions. And it's not go in, oh, what are we here for today? Pull up the EMR. Oh, now you had some labs, right? Well, don't hear me criticizing that. I see that. I get that. But this is what John told me. And then he told me, he said, and I do that so that I can get to what's important, and that's the spiritual care. That's what this Mayo guy told me. And I asked him, I said, John, how long does that take you? He said, hour and a half, 2 hours a day. I was like, wow. But he said, I make up and I get a lot of it back because sometimes there's not a spiritual need or there's not a spiritual interest, and I get out of the room sooner. That's on one level pretty radical, but then on another level, it goes back, and I know John's heart is why he is there. It's why he's there. And, when we're talking about this, it reminds me of another thing. I go in with the family med residents when they're seeing patients. I'm in the room watching, observing, coaching, making comments. And There's this one family med resident, I really appreciated her. She's on the keyboard, EMR, running what one of my family med friends refers to as a corporate cash register. But she has worked on her typing rather than as the patient is talking to her and she's asking questions, she's doing this and she's doing this. And I compliment her. I said, that is so good. So I don't know. They got these cool typing programs online that you can learn how to do this if you don't already know. Key for spiritual care in the midst of time constraints and breaking time barriers. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Intentionality. There are some things in your practice and in your patient care that you are very intentional about, every one of you. And it might be the thing that you have the tendency to forget. It might be the thing that you feel most passionate about, whether it's nutrition or brushing your teeth. No, it's not brushing your teeth. Then it says flossing. But you always mention it. This is Sarah. Caught up with Sarah and I said, what are you doing? And she said, you'll never believe it. And I'm like, what? And she said, vascular surgery. And I'm like, what? And yeah, and she's in rural Nebraska. No, she's in Omaha, I think, or Lincoln. Her attitude is, she said, Bob, I've got a can't touch this list. And things you can't touch in my life, God, my marriage, my family, I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to let things crowd in. But the pay dirt that she told me was, she said, Bob, every time I go to work, every day, I pray this prayer. God, help me to see what you want me to see. Help me to hear what you want me to hear, and help me to say and do what you want me to do. Now, that's a really cool prayer. Vascular surgery. I could have come up with that prayer, and you could have too. But then here's the kicker. No matter how hard it is, no matter how much I don't want to, no matter how scared I am. That was her prayer on her way to work. And then she told me, she said, Bob, I pray that prayer several times throughout my day. And I was like, wow. And that's sort of my type of prayer. That's the prayer I need to be praying. You guys probably not, but that's what I need to pray. John, the oncologist I talked to, another one of his practices. And if you follow him around, I tell students sometimes, watch what Dr. Shin does before he goes in the room. Pauses, puts his hand on the door, quick prayer. Every patient. Every appointment. This is Henry. Henry is a sports medicine doc, and I always forget, somewhere in L.A., near Pasadena, Arcadia. Henry, Henry, private practice, he and a couple of other guys. But one of the things, and you might not be able to do this. You may or may not be able to do this. But Henry told me, he said, we just schedule fewer patients. Just schedule fewer patients. Now, there's some administrators, again, I realize private practice, but when Henry told me that, I said, yeah. And Henry, that goes back to the whole thing of why are you there? And why are you doing what you're doing? And he said, absolutely. And it's not about making as much money as he could, not as about as getting as many patients on his panel as he can. It's about being able to live out his faith. And medicine's important to him, and getting old guys back out on the golf course or the shuffleboard, or young guys or women or whatever. But ultimately, it's about Jesus. And I appreciated that. And I don't know, maybe we ought to start pushing back a little bit more. This is Terry McGrath, family practice medicine doc, did our summer preceptorship. Love this guy. He's worked for private practice, FQHC, and first thing he told me, he said, I always ask myself, who am I working for? Is it Jesus, or is it the administrator, or is it the system? And he really wants to keep in his head, I'm working for Jesus. He consistently includes a spiritual history in every new visit. And again, sort of what we talked about earlier, this broadcasts and communicates that this is an open area, the whole spiritual domain. He says he typically has 4 visits an hour. He said some go longer if something comes up. He said sometimes, a lot of times, I can make up lost time later. Let me see. Yes, I do spiritual care if needed. And sometimes it is harder when it happens. I think here's the most significant thing Terry told me. He said, spiritual care can save time. Spiritual care can save time. Everybody's like, huh? And I was like, huh? And I said, tell me more. He said, Bob, when I start asking these types of questions, when I pray for my patients, when I address spiritual concerns that they have, which ultimately contributes to their overall well-being and their outcomes, they see that I care for them, and they don't push back on me when I make a suggestion or order a test or a prescription. They don't ask me near as many questions. Now, this is his patients. Your patients might be different. But he said, they don't ask me as many questions because I feel a lot of times when my patients are peppering me with questions, they're trying to find out if I really care about them and what I've suggested is really in their best interest. And when they know I care for them, they don't push back. And that saves me time. This is Todd. Todd is sort of in the twilight of his medical practice. He is retired from full-time, but he's still doing a little bit of local part-time stuff. Todd went into healthcare. He told me straight up, and I met Todd a long time ago. He told me straight up, he said, I went into healthcare for ministry. But he acknowledged, he said, it's never been harder, competing agendas. Honestly, I think we're all still trying to figure out this time constraint thing. He said in family practice, which is what he is, he said a lot of longitudinal care, both medically, spiritually, whatever. He said taking a spiritual history, building trust, this helps to be better prepared to hit the key questions, issues in the life of his patients. Everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. All of a sudden it blows up. Health-wise, family-wise, kid-wise, whatever. And they know that Dr. Stilson is a good source. He says he'll always put things in his notes about spiritual care, things he finds out in his spiritual history, so he can pick up on it. A lot of times when he finds out about something that happened, he told me about this one patient came in to see him, and he was reading in the chart before he went in that the patient had gone into the ER, and I don't know if they coded or whatever, and got resuscitated. And so he comes in, and he's like, John, dude, you almost died. It's like, man, God showed up for you. Now, that might be a little bit too direct for some of you, but this idea of framing situations and sort of recognizing there's more going on here than just me and you and the ER, he said that can make a lot of difference. Other thing, he said he works really hard at validating what patients are dealing with. I know, I see it. This is a tough time for you right now. Really tough time. Going back to Terry, I missed this point, but Terry says at the end of his first visit with patients, worth going back and finding, he says, if there's ever anything going on in your life and you have no one to talk to, I'm open. If you ever need prayer, I'm available. And then that leads into anything you'd like to pray for today, or anything, would it be helpful if I pray for you now? And he said, this is what will often open things up and begin to get to the heart of the problem, the spiritual problem, personal problem. And again, why would I even go there? The whole thing of we're multidimensional. And what happens in our soul affects what happens physically on our heart, in our mind, and all this. You're nodding your head. I know, you see this. Let me see. Anything else? A couple of other things. Oh, yeah. A couple of resources for you. You may be familiar with this book, Gray Matter, A Neurosurgeon Discovers the Power of Prayer, One Patient at a Time. This is by David Levy. David talks about not only his own personal spiritual journey, but his journey to doing spiritual care. Some really cool case studies that are stories that he has, both professionally and personally. This will keep you engaged professionally. He gets into some of the technical stuff. Really good book. This is another one you're probably not familiar with, written by some friends of ours, Michael and Tracy Balboni. Tracy is at palliative oncological care, something like that, at Harvard Med and Dana-Farber in Boston. It's the Institute of Religion and Medicine at Harvard. Wrote a book entitled Hostility to Hospitality. And what they do is they do a really good job looking at, you got the medical side of healthcare, you've got the legal side, you've got the business side, you've got the social side, and all of these things are colliding on healthcare and your patient care and your patients. And sometimes they're working in the same direction and other times they're pulling in total opposites. So examining this issue. All right. I want to give you some resources because a lot of times you might ask a spiritual history question and all of a sudden, boom, you're in deep and you're already behind and you ain't got no time every day. It's like, tell me something that I don't know. Pull out your phones. I want to show you some resources that are available. Everybody pull out your phone. You never thought you'd come to an academic or informational. Don't go to YouTube or Instagram or whatever. Okay, go to your browser, web browser. First one I want you to type in is everyperson.com. Everyperson.com. This is a website that one of our teams at Crew put together. The lead person was a lady who came to Christ later in life. This is an excellent website for people who are curious about faith, curious about God, maybe searching. And I'm going to give you like 1 minute to go anywhere you want to go on this website. Okay, peace of mind in an unstable world. Okay, yeah. Joe, what'd you look at? Yeah, scroll to the bottom of the homepage with a click of a button, I think 40 different languages. 50 different languages. Boom. Very good chance all of your patients would be covered. There might be an exception or two. How about you? What'd you look at? Okay. Oh, is that something your patients maybe think about? Yeah. This is an incredibly good resource. Very well done. People, I think you can ask questions. You can get in touch eventually with the live person. You're not going to be spammed. They're not going to sell your information. I don't think they're going to ask for money. And one day when I was coming back from LA, doing some spiritual care training with this FQHC, and got on the train to come back about 60 miles out of LA where I live, and sat down at this table, and I either joined a lady at a table or she joined me. She's going about 4 stops down, start talking, and I find out she's going to see her parents. I find out she goes out to see her parents once or twice a week. I find out that her parents' health is not good. I also find out that maybe they're sort of towards the end of their lives. And I ask her, I said, wow, what's keeping you going with all that? She tells me, I don't know. And I said, are you from any type of faith background? And she said, no. And she looked at me, she said, are you? And I said, yeah. And then she looks at me and she says, does it help? Now, this is softball. And I go, yeah. And she says, how? And I rattle off to her. And then I hear her say, maybe I need something like that. And tears are coming down her face at that point. And I hear the conductors call her stop and next stop. And I say, there's a lot of things I'd really like to talk to you about, but we don't have time. I said, you got a phone? I said, pull out your phone, launch your browser, go to everyperson.com. She pulls it up, holds this. I'm going to go, yeah. I say, bookmark it. And she does. And I said, I think this might be helpful to you in terms of finding something more. And the train is slowing to a stop. And she gets off the train, and I haven't seen her since. But I prayed for her. You're thinking, I've never heard of this site. That's okay. I hadn't heard of it either. But I can tell you this, last year, 2024, 80 million people came to this website. And our statistics show, our feedback shows 4,000 people are coming to Christ a day, this website. Diana? Oh, yeah. And she said, yeah. And she looked at it. She said, I'm going to read this later today. There's another website entitled everystudent.com. I'll tell you a secret. Exact same site, same pictures, everything. But it's for, you got somebody that's a student, a little bit more cool, because students aren't people, right? They're students. Another site, go to this one, startingwithgod.com, startingwithgod.com. Startingwithgod.com. This is a site that's maybe more, you get to share Christ with this patient. They come to Christ. Maybe they've sort of been a little dormant in their life, spiritual life. They want to grow more, want to re-engage. Maybe maybe they are already Christians. Incredible website. Resources, Bible studies, especially for new believers. You can email, you can get, I think it's, what is it called, Diana? Spiritual Starter Kit. You can get emails that'll start coming to you, help you begin to grow or continue to grow in your relationship with God. Same group of people that put together everyperson.com. Last site I want to mention to you is Hope Has Arrived. HopeHasArrived.com. This is a website primarily for cancer patients, cancer families. Be the main one that's caring for a cancer patient, but you might have some cancer patients. Or you might be the one that sort of begins to suspect they have cancer. Great. Not the same group of people that did everyperson.com, but similar mindset, similar, and they do have some connections with each other. There are other online resources that I like. The Bible Project, if you're familiar with that, is a really good one. If you're not, Google it, spend some time on it. There's something called the Marriage Course. Ever have a patient, troubled marriage? Think that might be having some impact on their health? That's a good resource. It's free. But anyway, we are almost out of time. What questions do you have? Comments? Yeah, not everybody has the advantage, the thing about, calling a chaplain. I come at this maybe a little bit different perspective than some. In the same way that you're probably going to get to know the people that you refer to professionally, you're going to have something about who they are, their skills, their competence level, their bedside manner, and you refer people, your patients, maybe to people that you think is going to take really good care of them. I would encourage you to do the same thing. If chaplains are available, that you find out, get to know that chaplain, get to know where they're coming from, get to know their perspective, and then decide whether you want to refer. And the reason I say that is that chaplains, maybe not the ones if you're working in a faith-based clinic, but chaplains in general, broad span in terms of where they're coming from, what they believe. What I can tell you, having worked with chaplains or seen or interacted with chaplains nationwide, you cannot assume that that chaplain at the hospital is like your pastor at home. I have had chaplains tell me, you do not share the gospel with patients. Just straight up. You don't do that. You don't go there. So to Lauren's point, I think chaplains can be a potentially good resource. And maybe if you're in a faith-based clinic, you've got a team, you've got volunteers. Yeah, absolutely. But in general, I think it's good to get to know them and refer accordingly. It's wonderful when you have those resources. Those of you who are in the room with the patients, you're the ones who maybe have the initial relationship and maybe the strongest relationship. So I would encourage you, don't assume. You're in an excellent position to be the lead on that, or the initiator, or the assessor. And utilize, and I fully appreciate what you said in your comments, but if you're the one in the room with the patients initially, get in the game. It's actually good for you. Yeah, no, when I first read about that AI could do that, I was really excited. My only experience with that is a couple of conversations I've had with the chief resident and one of the attendings at the family medicine residency. And the comment I think I heard from both of them was, it's really good, but it catches everything. And sometimes they felt like I spend more time like editing it down and all that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, but it might be getting better. Yeah, I would hope so. And that's one of the inherent things, my understanding about AI is constantly learning and adapting. Yeah. And there's a great technique that you can use. You remember something you wish you would have asked the patient or said to the patient. Use this in your own life in spiritual conversations you have with your neighbor. We've all had those. You get home, midnight. Gosh, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have asked this question. Guess what? You can ask that question later. And the way you do it, hey, last time you were here, Joe, you said this, and I've been wondering, and gosh, my doctor was wondering about what I said. What did I say?
From a note, I mailed it.
Yeah.
He came in like last week. He's like, I had to keep that note forever.
I believe it. Thank you. Why are you there? Yes, Paul.
I don't know. I know most. My practice has gone from being basically hospital-based and clinic to being clinic, and if my patients go to the hospital, some hospitalist or some takes care of it, and I'm in that in the laboratory.
Sure.
So right now,
It's the way things roll.
but that's the way it is. But I know one thing: when I go up and visit my patients at the hospital.
Oh, well, listen to this guy. I believe it. Yeah. Yeah, I remember first time I found out, you go to the emergency room. Well, what if I'm admitted? Are you going to follow me? No. Well, actually, that was in the MA, I think, told me that. Yeah. We are out of time. I will be around for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat anymore. If there's anything I can do to serve you, give me the chance to do that. If you're a student or you know a student in healthcare, one of the best things we do, all these guys you met did our whole person care preceptorship in California. So let them know about it. Thank you.